All right, so you've handed us this pretty hefty stack of research here about bias and judging.
Yes, quite a bit.
We're going to be trying to dive deep into studies
Yeah,
from
got it.
political science, economics,
Mm-hmm.
and even law,
It's going to be a deep dive.
all to try and figure out how a judge's background might affect their rulings, how it might color their rulings.
It's a fascinating topic.
So get ready for some
It really is.
aha moments, folks.
Yeah.
What I think is really interesting is that we're not dealing with just theories here.
That's right.
We're going to be looking at actual cases.
Absolutely, yeah. We're looking at research that's dug into thousands of cases.
Yeah.
Crunching the numbers.
So we're talking hard data here, not just speculation.
Yep, hard data.
Especially given all the talk these days about diversity on the courts.
Mm-hmm.
This is a really important question, right? Does a judge's race or gender,
Yeah.
or even their personal life, actually sway their rulings, sway the gavel?
I think a good place to start is with a factor that consistently emerges as a major player, and that's a judge's political ideology.
Okay.
Decades of research shows a very strong link between whether a judge leans liberal or conservative and the decisions they make.
Oh, really? So you're saying that their political leanings can actually help predict their rulings?
That's what the research suggests, yeah.
And this holds true across the board. I mean, we're talking local courts all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Across the board. Think of it this way. Judges are just like elected officials.
Uh-huh.
They're policymakers in their own right.
Okay.
They bring their own viewpoints to the table.
Yeah.
And those views, they influence how they interpret and apply the law.
So there is a viewpoint there.
Yeah.
It's not just a neutral application of the law.
It's very difficult to be completely neutral.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But is there any hard evidence for that?
Oh, yeah.
That a judge's ideology really does impact how they rule?
There's a fascinating study that I think really highlights this connection. Researchers actually developed an algorithm to predict Supreme Court votes
Oh, wow.
based solely on a judge's ideology and the facts of the case.
Really?
And get this,
All right.
the algorithm was incredibly accurate. It even outperformed seasoned law professors at predicting the outcomes.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So it seems like we can safely say that
Yeah,
ideology is at least a significant factor.
definitely.
Okay, so what about race and ethnicity?
Right.
Does a judge's background play a role there?
So this is where things get a bit more nuanced.
Okay.
Studies looking at Black judges specifically
Mm-hmm.
do find they tend to rule differently in cases where race is a central issue.
Okay.
So things like criminal sentencing
Yeah,
or voting rights.
makes sense.
They're more likely to side with minority defendants, for example, or support policies like affirmative action.
Yeah, that seems pretty intuitive, right? I mean, based on life experiences and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But are we talking about, are there any real-world implications here?
I think there are, because this isn't just about individual cases, right?
Uh-huh.
It speaks to a broader question
Yeah.
of fairness
Yeah.
and representation in the legal system.
Okay.
If judges from different racial backgrounds are bringing different perspectives to the table, that raises some pretty important questions about whether the judiciary truly reflects the diversity of our society.
So it's not just about having a diverse bench,
Right.
like for diversity's sake.
Exactly.
It's about making sure that
Yeah.
those viewpoints are considered in the cases where it matters.
That's right.
Are there any other findings
There is,
related to Black judges?
there's a phenomenon that researchers call panel effects.
Okay.
And it turns out that when a Black judge joins an all-white panel, the white judges on that panel actually become more likely to rule in favor of minority plaintiffs.
Interesting. So it's like having a different voice in the room actually changes the dynamic.
Exactly.
Are there similar findings for other racial or ethnic groups?
The research on Latino, Asian American, or Native American judges is unfortunately much more limited.
Okay.
There are some indications that Latino judges might be less likely to support discrimination claims, but we need more research
Yeah.
to really understand these nuances.
Okay, so there's a lot more to unpack there.
A lot more.
I want to move on to gender.
Sure.
We often hear about how women bring a different perspective to the table.
Mm-hmm.
But does that hold true in the courtroom?
Yeah, good question.
Do female judges rule differently
Well, research suggests
than their male counterparts?
that female judges are indeed more likely to rule in favor of plaintiffs in cases involving gender-related issues,
Okay, so that would be things like
like sex discrimination, or sexual harassment.
Uh-huh.
And this difference is statistically significant even when controlling for ideology.
Okay, so you're saying
Meaning there's something more at play than just political leanings.
it's not simply because...
It's not just that women tend to be more liberal.
Right.
It seems like.
Yeah.
Their lived experiences as women might be shaping their legal interpretations.
So this panel effect we talked about earlier,
Uh-huh.
does that apply to gender as well?
It does, yeah.
So does having a female on a panel?
Similar to what we saw with black judges, having a female judge on a panel makes male judges more likely to side with the plaintiff in gender-related cases.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's almost as if having that diverse perspective present
Yeah.
can shift the conversation.
So diversity isn't just about optics.
Right.
It actually changes the way
It seems that way.
judges deliberate,
It does, yeah.
arrive at decisions.
Uh-huh.
But aren't there also studies that show female judges might handle cases differently across the board?
You're absolutely right.
It's not just about these
Yeah.
women's issues.
That's right. Some research indicates that female judges are generally more likely to encourage settlements and write longer,
Yeah.
more detailed opinions that consider a wider range of viewpoints.
So it's like they're trying to find a more holistic approach.
Yeah, they're trying to find common ground, maybe,
Yeah.
and really consider the complexities.
It's a different approach to judging.
It is.
All right, so we've talked about ideology, we've talked about race, we've talked about gender.
Yep.
But now let's get to the really interesting part, and that's this idea of personal experience. Is there evidence that a judge's life outside the courtroom can actually influence their decisions?
This is where the research gets really fascinating.
Okay.
Studies are revealing that a judge's life experiences, beyond their demographics,
Okay.
can have a noticeable impact on their rulings.
Give me an example.
Okay, so for instance, studies show that having a daughter
Yeah.
versus a son
Okay.
makes federal judges, especially Republican ones, significantly more likely to rule in favor of women's rights
Wow.
in areas like reproductive rights and employment discrimination.
That's really interesting.
It's almost like having that personal connection
Yeah.
to a daughter's experiences can shift a judge's perspective even if they identify as conservative.
It makes you wonder what other kinds of things
Yeah.
you're looking at.
They're exploring all sorts of factors.
Dang.
There's research being done on the impact of a judge's age, religion, socioeconomic background, even military background.
Really?
We're just beginning to understand
Wow.
how all of these personal factors
Yeah.
intertwine.
It makes you think, right? Like we all bring our own baggage to the table,
We do.
so to speak.
Yeah.
But when you're a judge,
Yeah.
that baggage can have real consequences for people.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, it's a crucial point to consider.
Yeah.
And it leads to, I think, a larger question.
Okay.
If all of these factors can influence a judge's decisions,
Uh-huh.
does that mean all judges are inherently biased?
Mm.
How do we reconcile these findings
Yeah.
with the ideal
Yeah.
of an impartial judiciary?
Yeah. How do we...
Old question.
That is the question.
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's not an easy one to answer.
Right.
You know, remember, law isn't always black and white.
Mm-hmm.
There's often no single right answer.
Okay.
So judges inevitably bring their own perspectives to the table.
Right.
I mean, they're human beings, right?
Yeah.
They have their own unique life experiences, worldviews.
So how do we grapple with this? Are you saying that bias is just inevitable in the courtroom? Should we just give up?
Not at all. I think instead of getting hung up on individual bias,
Okay.
it's more helpful to kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture.
Okay.
How does the overall composition of the judiciary affect the types of decisions being made?
Okay.
Just like we want diverse voices in our legislature, you know?
Right.
Having a more diverse judiciary can lead to more nuanced and representative rulings.
So it's not about saying any one judge is biased or not.
Right.
It's about recognizing that different judges will bring different viewpoints,
Exactly.
and that diversity of thought could actually make for a fairer system.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that a truly just system needs input from a variety of viewpoints. This actually goes back to some of the early scholarship on legal realism.
Oh, okay.
Do you remember those folks?
Vaguely. Weren't they the ones who were challenging the idea that law is just a set of neutral rules,
Right.
applied objectively.
Exactly. They argued that judges' personal backgrounds and experiences, whether consciously or unconsciously,
Right.
inevitably influence their decisions.
Yeah.
And I think their work really paved the way for the kind of research that we're talking about today.
So let's come back to this idea of the big picture, right?
Okay.
You're saying we should look at the overall composition of the judiciary,
Right.
not just focus on individual judges.
Yeah, imagine a scenario where, most judges come from similar backgrounds with similar experiences and viewpoints.
Yeah.
Their decisions are likely to reflect a certain set of values and priorities,
Right.
which may not represent the full spectrum of views and experiences in society.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that's precisely why diversity on the bench is so crucial.
Okay.
It's not about quotas or, identity politics or anything like that.
Right.
It's about making sure that the judiciary reflects the rich tapestry of perspectives that actually make up our nation.
And you're saying a more diverse judiciary is going to be more likely to produce more nuanced and representative rulings.
That's the idea, yeah.
Okay.
When you have judges from different backgrounds with different life experiences, they bring different insights and perspectives to the table.
Right.
They can challenge each other's assumptions, they can broaden the conversation, and ultimately, arrive at decisions that are more likely to be fair and just.
So it's not just about representation, like having judges that look like the people they're judging.
Right.
It's about having judges who can understand and empathize with a wider range of experiences.
Precisely. It's about having a judiciary that can see the world through multiple lenses, not just a single dominant one.
This kind of brings us back to this question of, is a diverse judiciary a better judiciary?
Yeah.
Is there any research that sheds light on that?
It's tricky to measure better, of course.
Sure.
But, research has shown that having more diverse judges can lead to some positive outcomes.
Okay.
For instance, some studies suggest that a more diverse judiciary can actually increase public trust and confidence in the legal system.
That makes sense.
Right. People are more likely to trust a system that they feel understands and represents them.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's also research that a more diverse judiciary can lead to a wider range of legal issues being considered and debated.
So it's not just about the outcome of the case.
Right.
It's about expanding the scope of legal discourse.
Absolutely.
And making sure that more voices are heard, which in turn could lead to more just outcomes.
Absolutely. And this can have a ripple effect throughout the legal system, right? It influences not just judicial decisions, but also legal scholarship, policy debates, even how the law is taught in schools.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the benefits of a diverse judiciary.
Yeah.
But are there any, potential downsides or challenges?
Yeah, it's important to acknowledge that, diversifying the judiciary isn't a magic bullet.
Sure.
It doesn't automatically solve all the problems of bias and inequality in the legal system.
Of course. Yeah, I can see that. So what are some of the challenges?
Well, some critics argue that focusing on diversity could lead to less qualified judges being appointed.
But wouldn't that critique be based on the assumption that the current system, which has historically favored white men, is already selecting the most qualified candidates?
That's a really good point.
And how do we even define qualified?
That's a great question.
In this context.
Right. Does qualified simply mean, graduating from certain schools, working at certain firms, having a certain type of experience? Or should qualified also include things like having a demonstrated commitment to fairness and justice, a deep understanding of the lived experiences of diverse communities,
Right.
a willingness to challenge the status quo?
It seems like kind of a narrow definition of qualified if we're only including these traditional markers of success.
I agree. I think expanding our definition of qualified is essential if we want to build a truly diverse and representative judiciary.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
What are the key takeaways for someone like me?
Yeah.
A regular person who's trying to understand all this stuff, what should we keep in mind as we think about the judiciary?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is just that judges are human beings.
Yeah.
Just like everyone else.
Right.
They have their own backgrounds, experiences, biases, and those things inevitably shape their decisions.
So even the most well-intentioned judge can't totally escape their own worldview.
Right, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, as we've been discussing, right?
Yeah.
Different perspectives can enrich the legal process.
Right.
It's when those perspectives become too homogenous, too dominant,
Right.
that we run into problems.
So what's the solution? I mean, should we be striving for some sort of objective standard for judging that's completely free from bias?
I think that's a noble goal, but I'm not sure it's really realistic or even desirable, you know?
Okay.
What we need is not objective judging,
Yeah.
but a system that acknowledges the inherent subjectivity in legal decision-making
Yeah.
and strives to ensure that a diverse range of perspectives are represented.
So it's not about pretending bias doesn't exist. It's about recognizing that it exists and then figuring out ways to, like, mitigate the negative effects.
Exactly. It's about creating a system that's more transparent, more accountable, and more responsive to the needs of a diverse society.
So, okay, if judges are always going to have these different perspectives, how do we make sure those perspectives are as fair as possible?
Well, one approach is through judicial education. We can provide judges with training on implicit bias, cultural competency, and other topics that can help them understand and address their own biases.
So give them the tools to recognize it and then,
Right, give them the tools and knowledge
address it.
to recognize and mitigate their biases.
What else can we do?
Another critical factor is judicial selection.
Okay.
We need to ensure that the process for selecting judges is fair, transparent, and open to candidates from diverse backgrounds.
Right.
And this means moving beyond traditional notions of qualification and considering a broader range of factors, including a candidate's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So reform the selection process.
Yeah, I think so.
So more people can apply. That's a big task. But
It's a big task, yeah.
it's a worthy one.
Absolutely. It requires, I think, a real shift in mindset.
Yeah.
A willingness to challenge the status quo and reimagine what a truly representative judiciary could look like.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive.
It has.
I've got a lot to think about now.
It is a complex issue.
Yeah.
But I'm glad we could shed some light on it.
Yeah.
And hopefully, it'll inspire you to continue exploring these questions and advocating for a more just and equitable legal system.
This has been a fascinating deep dive, I have to say.
It has been.
We've seen how a judge's background, and their experiences can really influence their decisions.
Absolutely.
We've talked about diversity on the bench.
Yeah.
Where does all of this leave us?
That's the question.
What are we supposed to do with this information?
I think that's the crucial question, right?
Right.
Knowledge is only powerful when we put it into action.
Yeah.
I think what this deep dive gives you is a new framework for thinking critically about the judiciary.
Okay.
It encourages you to ask tough questions.
Yeah.
Look beyond those surface-level assumptions and consider the systemic factors that shape legal decisions.
So it's not about pointing fingers or calling individual judges biased. It's about understanding how complex this system is and working toward a more fair and just process for everyone.
Exactly. For example, the next time you read about a court decision, you might pay closer attention to the judge's background. And consider how their experiences might have informed their interpretation of the law. Or you might think more critically about the composition of the court, asking whether it truly reflects a diversity of perspectives.
So we're not just passive observers anymore.
Right.
We're informed participants who can ask these tough questions.
Exactly.
And demand better from these institutions.
That's the idea.
This is really interesting.
Yeah.
Because you've given us a new lens to view the legal system through.
I'm glad.
And, we've only scratched the surface here.
That's true. There's so much more to learn and explore.
Yeah.
I mean, for instance, think about all the areas where research is still lacking. We need more studies on the decision-making of judges from a wider array of backgrounds. Latino judges, Asian American judges, Native American judges, LGBTQ plus judges.
We're putting together this giant puzzle.
Yeah.
But we're missing some pieces.
That's a great analogy.
It feels that way.
And each new piece of research really helps us see the bigger picture, revealing the complex ways in which personal experiences and societal forces are shaping our legal landscape.
It's like a good reminder that the pursuit of justice is this ongoing process.
Absolutely.
A constant effort to create a better system.
Right. A constant evolution.
For everybody.
It is.
So we need to see the judiciary not as this distant, untouchable entity, but as this living, evolving system.
It is.
But we all have a role in shaping it.
Exactly. And that's a powerful realization, right?
It is.
It empowers us to demand a legal system that truly reflects the values of equality, fairness, and justice for everyone.
You've given us a lot to ponder, and
it's a lot, I know.
This deep dive has been inspiring, to say the least.
Good. I'm glad.
Thank you for walking us through this.
Of course.
It's really important topics.
It's been my pleasure. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here.
That's right.
Keep asking those tough questions. Keep learning. And keep pushing for a more just world.
Absolutely. That's what we're all about here.
That's what it's all about.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.